That wasn't true.
Well, the fact of the matter, all the polls show going over those years from the time of 9/11, Frank Gaffney, all the way up until the invasion of Iraq, or the liberation of Iraq, as you call it, the American polling showed over and over again that people believed that the actual people on the airplanes that attacked us in those suicide raids on 9/11 were Iraqis. How did they get that idea? I would contend that the record here suggests that their leaders told them so. You disagree?
Well,
you disagree, right?
Yeah, I do disagree, and certainly none of the clips that you just broadcast say that. And on this question about who Muhammad Atta met in Prague and who he didn't meet with, look, I mean, I find it charming that David Corn would say maybe they were just getting together to keep tabs on one another if they got together. And there were intelligence reports. Ultimately, the CIA and DEIA, I think, concluded that they were not persuasive, but there were intelligence reports.
At the time that Cheney said that.
Ultimately, David, there were
at the time that Cheney said it, they were not pretty well confirmed. They were not confirmed when he said they were.
May I finish?
That's a lie to the American public, Frank.
May I finish?
Is it not?
May I finish?
Yeah.
At the time, there were reports that were confirming it. There were reports that were disputing it. I think Dick Cheney was reflecting.
True.
Absolutely true.
No.
The point, you said so yourself. The point is that when you look, Chris, at what Dick Cheney, what George Bush, what Don Rumsfeld, what all of the other people who you are still kicking around, to my astonishment, were saying at the time was, we are in a dangerous world. We are indeed a battlefield. The idea that they can't hit us here is no longer true. That people wish to hurt us here is now beyond doubt. And the question was Saddam Hussein one of those people? I believe he was. I am delighted that he's no longer in business, and I think the evidence that I've just suggested really makes it clear why the American people should be glad that he's not in business anymore.
Well, let's just quote the 9/11 Commission. We have no credible evidence that Iraq and al-Qaeda cooperated on attacks against the United States. Frank, do you at this moment in time, in March of 2009, do you challenge that?
I do. I believe that there is evidence that they were collaborating on all kinds of things. Whether we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt or to the satisfaction of that partisan or bipartisan, as you wish, commission, I believe is an open question. But here's the point. Just to hear me out, please, David.
Facts are the point.
Chris,
Frank,
just hear me out, please.
Not just what you believe.
Just hear me out. My point is, I'll defer to you in a moment. The point is that we don't have omniscience about the world, most especially about secret terrorist organizations and police states. We have a lot of evidence that these guys were meeting, they were organizing something, they were sharing technology, they were sharing intelligence. We have lots of evidence of that. The question is, what were they doing about it? We don't know. And I think to reach the conclusion that they were just keeping tabs on each other is ridiculous, David.
Frank, how do you breathe if you never pause?
I don't pause because you'll jump in and interrupt me. That's why.
We don't have good evidence. We have no solid evidence that they were cooperating. We have no solid evidence about that. I mean, now it's my turn.
Let me ask the rules of engagement. I'm just going to set the rules of engagement here. If we don't know that 9/11 had, or Iraq had anything to do with 9/11, if we don't know that, and you say it's an open case, and we never were able to prove that he had nuclear weapons, do you go to war against another country with the loss of lives and treasure of thousands of American lives and unlimited number of Iraqis dead? Do you do something like that? Do you go to war with another country when you don't have your case made? You admit it's an open case.
But that's
I want you to know the rules of engagement here. When do you go to war, Frank?
Well, in this case, I said to you, in the immediate aftermath of 3,000 Americans being slaughtered by people, some of whom had, in fact, collaborative relationships with Iraqi intelligence.
There we go again.
You take preemptive action to prevent the kinds of attacks that we now know Saddam Hussein clearly had in mind with chemical and biological agents. That's the problem.
Why didn't this evidence reach the bipartisan Iraqi? Why didn't the committee?
No.
Why didn't the committee? Why didn't the 9/11 Commission have this information if it exists? Frank.
I believe they may have had access to it, and they went with the judgment of the intelligence community that it wasn't clear-cut, it wasn't dispositive. But it's not the same thing as there's no evidence. That's simply not true.
This is the neoconservative conspiracy theory.
It's not the neoconservative conspiracy theory. There's documents that are available. David,
ignored evidence.
It's been published in books. It's been published in magazines.
Yeah,
Take a look at them.
Rory wrote a book that's been widely debunked and derided. Mike Isikoff and I took it apart in our own book. Yeah, there are books out there saying a lot of things, Frank. Doesn't make it so.
Look at Douglas Feith's book, which documents end-to-end
Douglas Feith is another fellow with a great track record on this.
Well, he happens to have been there in the midst of it and had the documents that you're disputing.
He was there. He was in the middle of this misleading. Listen, you say that it was an open case.
He was working with the evidence that was available.
Let's go back to what the president said days before he invaded Iraq. He said the intelligence and weapons of mass destruction was beyond doubt. He didn't say, we don't know, maybe yes, maybe no, we can't take a chance. He said it was beyond doubt. That's not even what you're saying now. So is that not misleading to the American public to say that we have intelligence that is rock solid?
It was beyond doubt at the time, and that was the view of all of your Democratic friends. And by the way, intelligence services all over the world
against it. Half the Democrats in the House,
and most of them, including the most prominent Democrats, voted for it on the basis of exactly the same intelligence, starting with Hillary Clinton, starting with Joe Biden, starting with John Kerry.
You're going to justify your actions by Democratic mistakes being in line with your mistakes?
No. What I'm saying is when you say this was a lie, when you say this was wrong, that's not true. It was beyond a doubt to the minds of Democrats as well as Republicans.
Okay, let me ask.
A lot of people,
can I ask you both? I have to separate you for a second and ask you this question about what we learned. What did we learn in the case for war as it was made? Did we learn that it was made fairly and appropriately and we went to war for good cause and we made no mistakes? Or did we learn that we rushed to war based upon a false apprehension on the part of the American people who believed there was some connection, as they do in the polling, between Iraq and 9/11, and a mistake, if you will, or a reckless case that there was nuclear weapons in the hands or about to be in the hands of Saddam Hussein, and that was a justification for war? Did we learn anything, or Frank, were we right to go to war and we did it right? Because I want to know what we've learned from this. It's in the past. We can't change it. What did we learn, Frank?
I think we did the right thing. And I think what we have unfortunately taken away from this experience is that we're going to let everybody get their hands on these weapons of mass destruction, most immediately Iran, and then deal with it after they start probably using it. I think that's a terrible lesson and the wrong one to have learned.
David, what we learned?
The lesson is not to take at face value over-the-top hyperbolic claims about what threats are. We had, Saddam Hussein was a potential threat. He wasn't the dire threat that George W. Bush and others portrayed him to be. And in all this talk about it's great that Barack Obama has not inherited a world with Saddam Hussein in it, he also has not inherited a world with 100,000 Iraqis who've been killed in the course of this time, 4,000 Americans, and tens of thousands with casualties. So it's not such a simple equation. When Ari Fleischer last night, or Frank now, says, isn't it great that Saddam Hussein's not here? It is great he's not here. He was a lousy SOB, but the cost was high in blood and treasure, and not just our blood.
Okay, I think we got to know more about it. I think the history hasn't been written yet, and I want to see more history written on this. I don't think Doug Feith's the last word on this, nor are we. Thank you, David Corn. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, people like him had their way. Thank you, Frank Gaffney. Thank you, David Corn. Coming up, one of the funniest men